Welcome from TMT. The film you're about to see comes from our Self-Move series and illustrates load philosophy of household goods. The vehicle being used is a straight truck with a 24-foot box. It is of a size and a dimension-wise that lines up well with what the size of the units you will be working with. You will likely be using different types of pads as well as logistic straps that we illustrate in our basic mover lesson. But all other loading rules will apply as the laws of physics don't change. The fundamentals of loading are built upon the concept of tier building. A tier of furniture is a single roll of furniture loaded crosswise in a trailer, a freight box, or some other type of transportation or storage unit. We are going to discuss these tiers before we start and show you some of the items that we'll usually find in these tiers. The first tier that we'll discuss is the standard tier. This tier will usually consist of items between 17 and 19 inches wide. Items typically found in this tier include dressers, entertainment centers, nightstands, dining and kitchen chairs, various side tables, coffee tables, and most of the boxes that we use in this industry. Do you notice a theme on the direction these items are loaded in? Notice how we measure depth in dressers, but width in chairs. The wide tier. This tier will exceed the 20-inch mark, but may include items of a narrower width, either combined with other narrow items or turned a different direction. Common items used in this tier include appliances, upholstered furniture, desks, table saws, radial arm saws, lawn mowers, wheelbarrows, wide coffee tables loaded on their feet or ends, file cabinets turned long ways in the load. This can be a catch-all tier and should be tied off. You may also want to sandwich this tier between two standard tiers. Remember, you can use smaller items to snug up your tier as long as they do not protrude past the tier base. The narrow tier. The least stable of all tiers and can usually be avoided by using common narrow items in standard or wide tiers. These items are mirror cartons, mattress cartons, file cabinets, book cartons, bookcases, and tabletops, as well as head and footboards. Remember, you can combine a standard tier base and a narrow tier base to make a wide base if needed. This is good for the customer with 8 bicycles and a wheelbarrow and a lightweight barbecue. Narrow tiers should be tied off and never load 2 of these tiers in a row or combined after a wide tier. Now we have an idea of how to put one of our tiers together. Let's watch as we assemble some tiers for you. Hopefully you will have completed our basic packer and mover package to get an idea of how we prepare a shipment and a customer's home, as well as how to use equipment properly and the correct carry methods. Let's go out to our customer's house and start our load.
Your load position is very important. So where do you park the truck? Try to put it in a position that allows it either to be level or tilted downward in a forward direction, even if it means parking in the wrong direction on the street. If you try to load uphill, you will find your tier or wall falling back on you. Also, be aware of parking larger trucks on driveways. They can crack the concrete and leave you with a large repair bill. Asphalt and gravel are fine, and sometimes parking on the street next to the driveway will leave you with plenty of room to stage all of your items for loading selection. The truck is here. Your shipment is packed and ready to be loaded. You have lots of help, but where do you start? You start with the furniture. Always save your cartons until the furniture is in first. Okay, which piece do you start with? Here's 3 simple suggestions. What is the most odd-shaped piece? Got a jungle gym? Load it first and fill inside with outdoor items, including bicycles, yard tools, and patio furniture. Do we have an assortment of odd-shaped items? Most people have sofas and large upholstered chairs. That's a good start. Others may have a garage full of power saws, woodworking equipment, and rolling toolboxes. start with those. If you have both, you will load one wall or tier with sofas. Then load what is called a standard tier, which we'll show you in a minute. Then load the other tool tier. Is there a tough loading condition? With no outstanding strange-shaped items, get rid of any stairs or long carries as early as possible. This will improve morale immensely when your help knows the tough stuff is done. Following these rules in that order will save as many cartons as possible. Of course, if you are loading the strange-shaped items, feel free to use some cartons to fill holes to square off the load. We're now going to show you how to build these walls we've been discussing, referring to them as tiers. Don't be confused, they're still walls, they just come in different widths. All tiers will have sections according to height. You'll need to understand the bottom of the tier is the base, the middle of the tier is the center load, and the upmost section is the top load or chowder. Remember these terms. The items in your household can fill a couple of these categories at times, but usually only two, and that will be based on the two categories being together. As an example, a nightstand is usually a center load item, but in a pinch can be used as a base, as long as it is of a sturdy design and items loaded on top are not too heavy. A hamper will usually end up as a top load, but can be moved down one level to a center load if the weight on top of it is spread out over other items next to it. Wardrobe cartons make great center loads, but can be used as a base in a pinch as long as items being stacked on top of it are not too heavy, like patio furniture, bicycles, gas barbecues, or lighter chairs. Before we get into it, we want to familiarize you with a couple of more terms, one of which is to the load, which refers to a forward direction to the front of the truck. Another term is to the wall, which means to either side of the truck, usually in reference to leggy furniture. The type of tiers that we name will be named for what is in the base or main section of the tier. We start with the triple dresser, loaded on the side of the box with the drawers into the load. Next, we place a nightstand to the right of the dresser and stack its mate on top of it. It is important to remember you can use any similar solid piece of furniture next to the dresser as long as its depth matches. Also, remember that most dressers will have a larger gap underneath that will allow you to get rid of weights, sledgehammers, axes, and other similar items you may not care to place high in the load. The nightstands together are about 20 inches higher than the dresser, which will allow for a mixture of dining room and kitchen chairs. Between the two chairs, there is a space for a small carton, so fill it. Snug it up. Next, 4 chairs are married into each other. 2 with legs to the wall, then 2 more with legs loaded into each other in the center. This leaves a small gap across the top, which we will fill with a plastic tote and 2 small cartons. Each chair has a small carton loaded into its legs and all surfaces are covered. The second tier we will load will start with 2 leather love seats. This particular shipment has 7 large pieces of leather furniture, so we need to start getting them out of the way. Each love seat is loaded on end, feet to the walls and backs to the load. There is a small gap between the backs and bed rails are wrapped into bundles and stood on end to fill that gap. Next, we place a highboy dresser between the 2 love seats with the drawers facing into the load. Notice the gap underneath. A TV is then placed on top of the dresser. This allows the slope of the horn to force anything loaded on top of it to lean forward into the load. A decorative bench is then loaded on its side, feet facing the rear of the truck. Then 2 footstools are loaded on end inside the legs. A third footstool is loaded on end on top of the love seat on the left. 2 large totes are stacked between the footstools and table legs in a wrapped bundle, which are loaded into the gap between the bench legs and the totes. Next, a queen footboard combined with 2 folding chairs fill out the top. Tier number 2 is done. We're still flush at this point. No cartons were loaded in this tier. Tier number 3 starts with a china cabinet, front facing into the load and stacked as it normally would be. 2 wardrobe cartons are stacked next to the cabinet, and 2 flat style totes are used to fill the remaining gap. It is important to remember that anything of the proper width could have been used to fill in next to the cabinet. Files work, as well as yard tools in place of the totes, as long as the yard tools are wrapped. Next, we place 4 small or 1.5 cartons on top of the cabinet. Small original cartons are used to fill the gaps left above the totes and wardrobes, and small bed parts fill out the top of the 1.5 carton above the cabinet. Finally, 2 mirror cartons are stacked on top of each other to the rear of the cabinet to bring it even with the wardrobes. Canopy bed parts fill the gap between the mirror and cartons and the wardrobes. This will snug up the load. You might consider tying off this tier if the original loader will not be present at delivery. As we end it, our tier is flush all the way across. 8 cartons were loaded in this tier. A sofa is brought in and placed on the left side on end, feet into the load and the back of the sofa to the wall. A second sofa is brought in and placed on end on the right side with the feet to the load and back to the wall. You could have placed the feet to the wall and back to the load, but this situation matched the 2 pieces better with the feet to the load because of sofa depth. Next, we bring in a 4-drawer file cabinet and load it between the sofas. Drawers into the load and a 4.5 carton is loaded on top of the cabinet. We start the top load of this tier with a large tote on top of the sofa on the right. Next to it, we place a server cart on its side with the legs to the rear, followed by 2 large totes starting from the left on top of the other sofa. Finally, we flush out the front with a king headboard and finish with a small carton for a gap at the top. If you're unsure about stability or will be unloading downhill, tie it off. Tier 4 is complete. This tier starts with loading a refrigerator using an appliance dolly. We recommend this type of dolly as it is a heavy item and the strap design allows for a little more security as well as stability. The first refrigerator is loaded on the right-hand side with a door to the load. Next to it, we place a large storage cabinet, doors to the load, and next to it, we place a freezer with doors to the load. We now have a relatively level tier, and we place some plywood bedboards across the top to protect the particle board cabinet in the center of the load. Keep in mind that it is generally safer to load particle furniture on their sides, as they are usually designed with little support on their tops. We place a small cabinet on top, feet to the load, and then place an end table on top to the right. Cartons fill the gap between the cabinet and the end table, and then 2 table leaves fill out the top of the small cabinet. A small rug bundle finishes the tier on top of the cartons. This tier begins with a double dresser loaded with the drawers into the load. Next to it, we place 2 dish packs and level off with a wrapped bundle of bookshelves. There's a small gap to the right that is filled with an ironing board. As we have not used many cartons, we can now afford to create a layer across our tier of 3.0 or medium cartons. So, starting our center load, the next level begins with another TV, loaded screen out. A coffee table is loaded feet to the load, and the gap between the 2 pieces is filled with a small file cabinet, doors facing the load. Again, depending upon the variety of furniture, keep your tiers flush, front to back and next, as level as possible using small pieces to close gaps. We start the top load with a mixture of customer cartons, a tote, a small wrapped barbecue, and then finishing it off with a shoe rack and bunk bed ladder. We are more than halfway through the load, and just now beginning to rely on cartons. Most of the large furniture is loaded. Our load is tight and flush. This tier will start with a washer and dryer. Notice how the appliance has a pad placed across the top. Identical book cartons are loaded side by side on top of this before padding the entire piece. These solid identical cartons raise the load and are above the washer console, which is very delicate. For additional protection, you can insert a washer block or wedge of cardboard along the top of the tub edges to prevent seal damage. You can also place used tape rolls over the washer and dryer knobs and shrink wrap the console to prevent knob damage. The dryer is loaded next to the washer, face to face and prepared identically. Next, 2 mirror cartons are slipped in behind the appliances to flush out the previous tier. A hope chest is loaded on end, feet to the load. Don't load your chest like this if it has wood handles on the end. This one didn't. A dish pack is then loaded with a 3.0 carton on top, followed by a small ironing board loaded in front to flush out the base of this tier. Now we're going to get rid of two very large easy chairs, and we're going to do it a little differently. Most of your easy chairs are about 40 inches wide. These are considerably wider. So instead of loading them on their backs and marrying them together like dining room chairs, we're going to load them on their front with the feet to the load. The tops will overhang a bit, but we'll deal with that on the next tier. Small suitcases, a small toy, and flat package are loaded into the gaps. Because of the overhang, this tier is tied off. Tier 8 will be a simple tier, as we're going to design it to square off the previous tier. We start by filling in underneath the easy chairs with bunk bed ends, padded and stood on edge. Next, we place 5 dish pack cartons followed by 5 4.5 cartons. The remaining dining room chairs and kitchen chairs are then loaded and followed by a couple of suitcases and a small customer carton. We are now beginning to run out of small items and have one major piece of furniture remaining. Again, we are square and flush. You may notice at this point we are building around the roll-up door. It's important to leave some space around the door in case something should shift and leave you unable to open it. The last significant piece, a dining room buffet, is loaded to the left, front to the load. 3 medium cartons are loaded across the top, followed by a dish pack, wardrobe, and medium carton to the left. Notice how the dish pack and 3 cube match up perfectly next to the wardrobe. A bar stool is added to the left, back down, feet to the wall, and then a tote levels off the cartons on the right, topped with the last remaining stool, and a 4.5 carton is loaded into the gap between them. The center load of the tier is topped off with 5 medium cartons, and the tier is finished with 3 book cartons under the buffet. The goal is to finish square with what we have left, which is basically mattresses and cartons. So we start with the remaining bed ends from a double bed, wrapped and stood upright. Next, we block them in with a row of 4.5 cartons across the bottom for base. The queen box springs and mattresses are wrapped and set on top of the 4.5 cartons. This would have been the perfect spot to slip any unpacked glass tops or large pictures between these 2 mattresses. We didn't have any left, so they were loaded as is. 3 miscellaneous cartons are loaded opposite to tighten up the tier. The final tier is a mirror of the previous tier. 5 4.5 cartons form the base of the tier, followed by the double set. Again, there is another opportunity to hide flat, delicate pieces between the mattresses. Cartons fill the right side, and the load is tied off. There is 8 inches of floor space remaining. We will use that to load our dollies and tools for delivery. This load sequence was not staged, and an estimated 9,600 pounds was loaded with the help of 3 people. Actual load time was just over 4 hours. 77 pads as well as 4 rolls of tape were used.
You've just seen how we put together a load for a straight truck or a bobtail. The same rules apply to the large trailers, and with the exception of paper pads and other minor preparation, overseas shipments in steamship containers. Tier building in storage vaults is the same on just a smaller scale, and we invite you to watch our lesson in regards to storage vaulting. Loading another person's household goods starts before you open your truck doors. Be prepared for each load as you do your initial walkthrough. Which items will you load first? How many standard or wide tier items do you have? Is the customer concerned by a particular piece? Is there an item with a particular challenge? Do you need special equipment or additional manpower? Is this shipment going in different directions? Or are there still items needed to be packed or crated? These questions all need to be answered before you begin loading. You should have an idea in regards to any situation that may arise and be planning for it ahead of time. Thank you and good luck.